Hey guys, welcome back to another video, and in this one we're going to be talking about how to improve your approach shot, become more accurate on the course, and save strokes when you're playing around. No matter how good you are at the sport of disc golf, if you're just starting as a beginner or you're Gannon Burr, everyone makes mistakes. And with those mistakes, especially those off the tee, you're going to have to scramble or you're going to have an approach shot to try to save your par or save your bogey, whatever it may be, and just limit the amount of strokes you spend out on the field. And with these mistakes, that leads to the need for a consistent, reliable approach shot. And now, when I first started playing tournaments, I noticed that some guys that I played with maybe didn't have the distance. They wouldn't throw much above 300-ish feet, but every single time their approach shot, whether it was like a long par 3 or a short par 4, every time it was within 250, 220-ish feet, the disc always found its way underneath the basket or within 15 feet. Easy putt for par, easy putt for birdie, and that consistency of doing that every single hole makes it really easy for them to score well. The reason why I'm making this video is because there's common mistakes found within it. The most common is definitely missing too short or too long, and obviously missing left or right. And in this video, I'm going to be breaking down what the approach shot is and how to reliably and consistently get a great approach shot so you can save those strokes out on the field. So, where do you start? First thing to do is to identify whether or not you have the right discs for the right job. For the approach slot, there typically is 1 to 3 slots that a player can use for approaches. For myself, I like to use a stable approach slot and a neutral approach slot. Some players also have the forehand, so they only really need a stable and a neutral. But for other players that don't have a forehand, you could also introduce in an understable slot, so something that's flippy or wants to turn the opposite direction of what the disc, of how the disc wants to fade. So for right hand backhand players, it would be a disc that drifts to the right, and for lefties, it's this discs that drift to the left. For a example of a stable approach disc, I use Champion Toros. The reason I use Champion Toros is because I like the grip, and 2, they're reliably consistent, and they have varying stabilities to where if you beat one up, for example this one, it can go a little bit straighter, but always have that consistent finish at the end. And newer ones are just kind of stable out of the box and will just fade nicely and have that reliable fade. For my neutral slot, I use a Neutron Soft Proxy because they're semi-torque resistant. So if I put a lot of power on it, they'll always go straight and just plop down, don't get any skip, which is what I really like about them. But there are plenty of options for either. For the stable slot, every manufacturer has that slot filled. So for that includes the Zone, the Entropy, Tactic, the new Drop, the Toro, and there's probably plenty more. Drop a comment below on what your favorite approach disc is. The reason why everyone should have a stable approach disc is because it's reliable, it's consistent. No matter what angle you kind of put on it, it won't drastically impact the flight of the disc. So if you throw it out to flat, it'll fade, hyzer fade, and hyzer. It should fight out and try to fade at the end. And so it makes it easy for players to develop consistent game, especially when you have a wide open hole or there's open areas where you can just put a disc out flat and have the disc do all the work and fade towards the basket. And for the start of your approach mastery, you should definitely be working with a stable approach disc. So if you don't have one, I suggest you check one out, try to see which one you like, and if you already have one, that's great. But if not, I have a bunch on my website at www.disczone.com. You can check them out there. To have an accurate and consistent approach shot, I like to minimize certain body movements, and I'll break that down right here. So the first thing you need to do is to throw standstill. And the reason I tell people to throw standstill is because when your feet are grounded, it eliminates the need for footwork. And so since you're not thinking about your footwork and where to place your feet, it gives you more time to think about accuracy and more control over your angle, since you're more consistent with your body movement. There's not as many moving parts, and therefore it's more consistent. And I like to break things down from the head to the toes after. And so first things first, you're always keeping your eyes on the target. I like to keep my head in place, kind of if I'm throwing in this direction. Throughout my swing, I'm keeping my head forward, similar to how Joey Buckets or Joey Anderson throws throughout all his shots, but I only do this for approach shots just so I know where I'm aiming and I know where I want my disc to go. And moving down to the torso area, I like to minimize my torso movement. In a full power throw, you typically want to have your hips and torso offset to where your torso is facing basically backwards of where you're throwing. And then when you pull through, it naturally moves forward. However, in approach shots, I like to minimize my torso movement to where my maximum power, even if I were to throw full power, would be significantly less. So this helps control my distance and my arm speed to where if I'm only, instead of moving back like this and I'm only moving my torso here, this allows me to create more control with my shot and consistently be able to pull my disc forward and apply the right amount of power for each shot given. Some players even apply this like Simon Lizotte to where they not only minimize torso movement, but they minimize arm movement as well. So Simon's approach shots or short putter approaches, he'll be looking at his target and barely bend his arm and pull through with minimal torso movement. However, I don't like doing this because I think about too many things when my arm's bent and my torso is extended a certain amount. Like it makes me have to think about too many things. So I like just to break it down to where my torso isn't moving as much backwards, but my arm is staying relatively similar, maybe not extending fully, but just a little bit. And then moving down from the torso, you have your hips. I like to keep my hips the same. They're just rotating at the same speed, a little bit slower, but kind of just matching what your arm does. What I'm getting at is basically my arm is determining the power of this throw because my torso is limited and my hips are moving very similar. So my hips and arm are moving similar, but my torso is putting a cap on the threshold of power I can use in my shots. And now that you kind of have an idea of the basic mechanics of the throw, where should you start throwing? I believe that you should start throwing about 20 to 30 feet past your maximum jump putt distance. And typically, I mean, one, you could just figure that out yourself by going to a field and kind of using a rangefinder to see how far you can jump putt. Or two, what I like, if you don't have a rangefinder or don't want to walk it off, your shortest approach shot is about 33% of your maximum distance. So my maximum distance on a golf line, I should say, and my maximum distance is about 420-ish feet on a golf line. And so that, I believe 33% of that is about like 138 to 139 feet. Based on that distance, you should start there with your stable approach disc, whatever you chose, and try to focus on aiming at an object 10 to 15 feet to the right of your target. And you want to focus on throwing flat or at a consistent angle. Typically I like throwing flat because when I throw flat, I just let the disc do all the work. I don't want to put any manipulation on the angles unless need be. And with this, you want to practice your basic mechanics to where you're just doing a bunch of repetitions where your torso isn't bending as much to the back. You're letting your torso control the maximum arm speed, but you're letting your arm just naturally flow through. And this takes a lot of repetition to build that foundation and the muscle memory needed to consistently do that shot every single time. I feel like you could start increasing the distance once you reach 90% of your shots within 20 to 25 feet of the object or basket you're throwing at. 9 times out of 10 on a 140-foot upshot, you're getting it within 20 to 25 feet. You can add another 30 feet. From there, and then 9 times out of 10, once you feel like you can throw a stable disc out to the right, have it fade in, 9 times out of 10, you move back another 30 feet until you reach your comfortable max distance with an approach disc. After you've practiced this consistently, it should be pretty easy once you pull out a rangefinder or you kind of gauge like, oh, I'm 180 feet away from the target. This is the amount of torso twist I need. And once you feel like you've reached your comfortable maximum distance with the approach shot of a stable disc, you can start transitioning to neutral discs and start over, do the same exact process again. The only difference is you'll be throwing flat right at the target instead of 10 to 15 feet to the right. And before I end this video, there's 3 important notes that have significant impact on your approach shot. Number 1 is wind. Wind is probably one of the biggest impactors on approach shot accuracy, and so I could break it down for you very quickly. If you have tailwind or wind that's blowing from behind you forward, it's going to make your disc want to be slightly more stable and drop a little bit more. Not necessarily fade out to the left a little bit more, but it'll want your disc to drop. So you can counteract this by putting a little bit more power on the disc or putting a little bit more angle on the disc. So your disc can fight that tailwind by pushing to the left. For the opposite wind or headwind, your disc is going to want to, if you throw it flat, is going to want to slow down, not travel as far due to the wind pushing against it, and it'll cause it to become more understable. So I want to push it to the right a little bit for those right hand backhand players and to the left for the left hand backhand players. So this always goes back to the importance of having a stable approach disc, because you want to be able to fight that wind and consistently finish in the same spot. And then there's also left to right wind, where if you push your disc flat, your disc is going to want to drift slightly to the right when it's flat, and then when it exposes its flight plate to the wind's going to want to hit it and push it down. Instead of letting it glide to the left, it's going to want to just push down on the disc. So that's very important, because to counteract this, instead of aiming 10 to 15 feet to the right, you're going to want to aim 5 to 10 feet to the right of the basket instead. So you're going to want to switch where you're aiming at. And then for the right to left wind, your disc, if you throw it flat, is going to want to lift a little bit more, because the wind's going to want to push up on the disc, and then when it hyzers, it's going to push the disc significantly more to the left. For number 2, it's ground play. So if you're playing on hard packed dirt, your disc is going to more than likely want to skip a lot more, to where it'll add like 10 to upwards of 30 feet of distance onto your shot. So depending on the stability of your disc and how hard you're throwing, if the ground is soft, if you're playing on grass or sandy terrain, your disc is more than likely going to want to sit, making sure to add a little bit more power just to get that extra distance is important there as well. And the last note is identifying hazards. If there's water on the left side of the basket and you're a righty backhand player, and the ground is relatively skippy and hard pack, you're maybe going to want to aim, instead of 10 to 15 feet to the right of the basket, maybe 15 to 20 feet to the right or even more, and create kind of this landing zone to the right of the basket, because you don't even want to bring the water into play. So you might as well play safe. 20 feet right of the basket is where you want to land, 20 to 25 feet, so that you land in that landing zone and always give yourself a chance for the putt. You never want to bring any hazards into play. This goes the same for trees. If you have trees on both sides of you, you obviously will throw a neutral disc. If you have water long of the basket, or a hazard or OB long of the basket, and you're 150 feet away, make sure you throw an upshot that's about 130 feet or 120 feet of distance instead, and have that disc skip up short of the basket so you don't bring it into play at all. Those are just kind of 3 important notes when you're practicing, so that you're always keeping your game polished. No matter if you master it in no wind, you can keep developing your shot based on the conditions that are in front of you. But besides that, that basically does it for this video. If you have any questions, feel free to put them down in the comment sections below. I'm normally pretty good about answering questions, so if you put one down there, I'll try to respond as fast as I can. And as I mentioned before, I have my own disc golf shop called Disc Zone. It's in Santa Cruz. I also have an online website, so I'd really appreciate it if you guys could check it out. It's at www.disczone.com. Check it out. Let me know how it looks. Comment down below on that as well. But as always, I appreciate all your support, and let me know what kind of videos you want me to make next. But besides that, I'll see you guys in the next video. Thanks.